They followed every rule they were given, worked hard, stayed loyal, kept going, and it worked. That's actually the problem. It's 1968, you're 8 years old, and your father just walked through the door. He's been at the factory since 6 in the morning. He doesn't say anything. He sits down, eats, stares at the wall for a while, and then goes to bed. Nobody talks about feelings at dinner. Nobody asks how your day was. There's no, how are you holding up? But the lights are on. There's food on the table, and a new pair of shoes appeared in your room last week without explanation. You don't need words to know you're loved. You just look at the refrigerator. Maybe you grew up with someone like that, or maybe that person is still in your life right now and you still don't quite know how to reach them. Because here's what most people miss when they argue with a boomer. You're not arguing with a person. You're arguing with a system that shaped them so completely. They can't see the walls anymore. And once you understand what that system actually was, everything about them starts to make a different kind of sense. This is the psychology of baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964. The generation that rebuilt a country from scratch and raised children who would question everything they built. Forget everything you have right now. No phone, no streaming, no instant anything. You want to hear a song? You sit next to a radio for 2-3 hours, cassette loaded, finger on the button, waiting. You want to buy something? You save coins in a jar for weeks. Out of stock? You come back next week. You want to talk to a friend? You walk to their house. They're either home or they're not. Waiting wasn't an inconvenience for this generation. Waiting was the whole experience. And when the brain grows up in that world, it learns something most of us have completely unlearned. Effort is not the path to the reward. Effort is the reward. That's not a philosophy they chose. It was wired in before they were old enough to question it. The generation that waited 3 hours for a song is now watching a generation that skips ads after 5 seconds. That's not a values gap. That's two completely different nervous systems trying to have a conversation. It's 1979. Your father has worked at the same company for 18 years. Same desk, same coffee mug. He doesn't talk about passion or purpose. He talks about showing up. Back then, your job wasn't just what you did, it was proof of who you were. Consistency was character. Loyalty was identity. Endurance wasn't a virtue you cultivated. It was just Tuesday. And when that's all you've ever known, the idea of defining yourself any other way feels almost impossible. When you spend 30 years connecting work to worth, the connection becomes automatic. You don't even notice it's there until you try to stop. That's why you'll hear it from boomers who've been retired for years. I just can't sit idle. I don't know what to do with myself. It isn't workaholism, it's a brain that learned the only way to feel okay was to be useful. Without the job, part of the mirror goes blank. Think about the boomers you know. Do they seem like people who work because they love the work, or people who don't quite know who they are without it? Baby boomers didn't trust institutions because they were naive. They trusted them because the institutions actually delivered. Pensions were real. The ladder had actual rungs. You worked hard, you moved up, you retired with something. That wasn't a promise. That was just how things worked. So when a boomer says, just follow the rules and you'll be fine, they're not being blind. They're describing a world they personally watched function. The tragedy is, that world is gone. Nobody told them the map expired. So they kept using it, handed it to their kids, watched the roads not match, and couldn't understand why. They built a world that worked perfectly, for a world that no longer exists. Being right once is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a belief system. It's 2008, markets are collapsing, and your boomer parent looks at the news and shrugs. Not because they don't care, because they've already seen this. The oil crisis, Black Monday, the dot-com crash. By the time 2008 arrived, they'd already lived through several versions of everything is falling apart. And every single time, it didn't. A nervous system stress-tested that many times stops treating uncertainty like a threat. It treats it like weather, something that comes, passes, something you wait out. The calm that frustrates younger generations in a crisis, not indifference, that's scar tissue. But that same steadiness, the part that never panics, is also the part that makes them hard to read up close. You're in your 20s. Things are hard. You don't say anything specific, but something in your voice gives it away. And the next morning, there's food in your fridge, your car got an oil change, a check appeared with no explanation. Nobody asked how you were feeling. Nobody said, "I'm here for you." But something got handled. Love, for this generation, was never something you said. It was something you showed up and did. Their own parents never asked how they felt either, so they learned it the only way it was ever demonstrated to them, practically, quietly, without much explanation. You wanted someone to ask if you were okay. They showed up with food instead. Both of you thought the other wasn't listening. Both of you were saying the same thing, just in completely different languages. Baby boomers are the first generation in American history to watch the world they built stop working for their own children. They did everything they were told to do. They handed the map to the next generation and watched it fail. Not because the map was wrong, because the territory moved. And that creates a grief that doesn't have a name. Not the loss of a person, not a failure you can point to, just the slow, quiet realization that the thing you structured your entire life around doesn't apply anymore. You can feel it sometimes in the silence after they say, "You just need to work harder," in the way they pause before finishing that sentence, like somewhere underneath, they already know. They internalized a very specific operating system during the most formative years of their life. Work tied to worth, loyalty tied to safety, staying power as the only metric that mattered. And that OS still runs, even when the world it was built for no longer exists. They're not broken, they're running legacy code. The gap between you and them isn't a values gap, it's a reality gap. They're not describing who you should be, they're describing who they had to become. The generation that came right after absorbed all of it. Same rules, same map, same belief, and followed it even harder until the floor disappeared. That's the millennial story, and it goes much deeper than burnout. Drop a comment, one word. If you grew up with a boomer parent or grandparent, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Every reply gets read, and if understanding why people think, feel, and behave the way they do is something that matters to you, you're exactly where you should be. They didn't get it wrong. They just lived in a version of the world that no longer exists.